Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome back. This is week 2 of our course, and in this little short thumbnail, I want to give you a little scaffolding of what we're doing this week and chat about a couple of things. First of all, on the process front, I want to talk about the idea of the term paper project, which, as you know, is going to come due, only about 2 months into our course, so there's not an awful lot of time to talk about getting it going. And I want to chat a little bit with you about the projects themselves. By the end of this week, on midnight on Sunday, in fact, I'm going to ask that you have sent to me an email bearing simply a title in which you state your name and tell me which of the term paper options you have chosen for your project. That will give me an idea of what I'll have to be looking forward to a little bit farther down the road when it comes time to read and evaluate them for you. So again, in the folder which is called Supporting Materials for Student Success, you will find examples written by students just like yourselves who have faced exactly the same kind of an assignment for each of the options, and you can take a look at each of those papers, get an idea of what they did before you, what a reasonable paper would look like under each of those assignment options. So I encourage you to take a look at those if you haven't already done so, and be prepared to send off that email to me with your choice so that I can see what you have coming down the line for me a little bit later. Now, secondly, onto the content material for this week. We're really talking about a couple of very important topics, and that is the notion of different types of societies. To get a feeling for what that's about, let me give you my view of what a society actually involves. It's a little bit more detailed than what you find in your chapter reading. First of all, keep in mind that society is people. It's a collection of people, if you will, and later we'll see that it's actually considered to be a group. The second thing about a society is that these people are persons who share a way of life. And you have found from reading chapter 3 that this way of life in its totality is called the culture of that society. These folks also tend to occupy a geographical territory, so they have a place physically where they live, reside, work, and conduct their lives. Very importantly, these people are coordinated among themselves in some way so that they can move forward and act collectively as a total unit. And then finally, the people who exist within a society think of themselves as being members of that society. Your chapter will then go on to take a kind of a socio-historical developmental view, moving from very simple to very complex forms of society, and we give names to these kinds of societies based upon what amounts to the dominant activity that occupies the people living within that society. So we begin with very, very simple small societies that are called hunting-gathering societies. And for these people, the major problem in their lives is simply staying alive day to day and week to week and year to year. So their activities are centered around gathering of food, making of their basic clothes, and just basically staying alive. We move from the hunting-gathering form of society into what we call a pastoral society, in which human beings have learned to domesticate animals. And this is important because it begins to allow them to settle down. About the same time the pastoral societies are developing, we also find the horticultural societies. These, in effect, are people who have learned how to farm on a very, very small scale, basically a garden-level scale. And it will take two forms. One is called the Subsistence Horticultural Society. This is where people make just enough food to support themselves and to live comfortably. However, there's also a secondary form of horticultural society called a surplus horticultural society, which people choose to use more and more of their time to build more and more than what they need to just simply survive, and they can put aside a surplus for either or both of two purposes. One, to protect themselves against the proverbial rainy day when growing conditions aren't very good, and secondly, to place up enough store that they can eventually engage in trade and commerce with other peoples. Beyond the horticultural form, we move into the agricultural form of society, which is horticulture based upon almost steroids, if you will. This is where vast acreage is placed under till, and entire huge gigantic societies in terms of the numbers that we know today can begin to emerge. These kinds of societies can have millions of people within them. The horticultural societies are much, much smaller, and the hunting-gathering societies are very, very small. Hunting-gathering societies, if you find 50 people in such a society, that's getting to be a pretty good-sized hunting-gathering and society. The horticulturists are able to make their way in life because they have learned how to use what's called the digging stick. Basically being able to draw a sharp pointy stick through the earth and put seeds in it, cover the seeds over with earth, and reliably and predictably grow crops. The agricultural peoples have learned about the plow, which allows them to turn over earth from a greater depth and much more nutritious support for the vast acreage that they will place under till. In addition, the agricultural peoples have learned how to harness animal power, cattle, oxen, horse, and so forth. And actually, believe it or not, human power is also used to pull a plow through the earth in agricultural societies. About the middle of the 18th century in Great Britain, we see the emergence of industrial society. This is a situation in which humans have learned to harness the powers of nature other than animal and human power. So here we have wind power, electric power, steam power, and so forth, specifically powering machines in a factory-based system of production, which dramatically increases the complexity of the material culture under which these people live. And then finally, we have post-industrial society, of which the United States became the world's first in about the mid-1950s. This is a society in which the dominant form of activity centers around the provision of services, which are extremely diverse. Everything from very mentally involved kinds of services like teaching and research to skill-based services like manicuring and haircutting, for example. So this is a very sophisticated form of society, the one in which we currently live today. The other thing that I want to kind of bring to your attention is the notion again of the paradigms that we encountered the last time around. Structural functionalism, the way I think of it is, it's a great way to look at how society is actually laid out. Think of it as being able to take a snapshot of society at a point in time. It would be a great way of looking at things to show us how things are put together, how they're organized, how they relate one to another. The conflict perspective shows us how any given structure came to be and how it is changing. In other words, it is a process-oriented kind of a model or paradigm of society. And these two types, the stability and the change models, are the kinds of things that our old friend Auguste Comte talked about as being the two major concerns of sociology, namely the structural stability and also the structural change, the two sides of the same coin. And then finally, symbolic interactionism, which, as you know, is a small-scale view of society, can be viewed from the macro perspective as well, by stressing the idea that society is replicated moment by moment through the actions of many, many, many individuals who are doing what they do on a daily basis. So they actually are embodying and enabling the culture in a moment-by-moment kind of a way, and symbolic interactions would look at that as defining society in the aggregate overall, if we were able to take a look at the many, many, many persons who comprise society at a point in time. Now lastly, I would like to talk a little bit about that symbolic interactions view a little bit more by talking about the people in the micro order. When they are operationalizing what I'm calling the social structure here, they are doing so by virtue of occupying a variety of what we call social statuses. And you can think of social statuses as being a kind of a person that one might be within the structure of society. There are two fundamental types. One is what we call ascribed social statuses, and these are kinds of people that we are over which we have no control whatsoever. In other words, they're given to us as a condition of birth or circumstances over which we have no control. The vast majority of them, especially in a society like our own, however, are what we call achieved social statuses. These are societies that we do control to some extent. We can actually plot our way into them. For example, becoming an occupation, becoming a professor, becoming an accountant, becoming a surgeon, becoming a short order cook. Those are achieved statuses. When we actually do what the social status is about, we are actually enabling what is called its role, R-O-L-E. And you should think of role as the set of behavioral expectations that attach to a social status in the particular social context within which that social status is found. So for example, right now, I am your professor, and I am actually behaving or doing something that is related to my being a professor, and it's dictated by the fact that I'm offering it in the context of this online class. So with that as background, I hope that that'll give you a good overall view of what you're encountering in our present week's academic work. And on that point, I'm going to sign off and hope to see you next week when I'll have another thumbnail dealing with that material. Bye-bye for now.